Welcome back, focused learners. Today, we're looking at something just a little bit different. We're actually going to zero in on a single sentence, just one. But honestly, it's a piece of source material so incredibly dense that we need this entire explainer to really unpack the whole shebang. We're exploring what I like to call the paradox of the path. So, if you've ever felt like you're just grinding away, right? Putting in the long hours, risking your hard-earned resources, and kind of wondering if you're actually heading towards your ultimate goal or just, spinning your wheels toward a crash, well, this is absolutely the explainer for you. Because the text we're analyzing today completely redefines human endeavor. It treats it not just as some abstract philosophy, but as a literal equation of risk, probability, and action. Okay, let's dive into this.
The road to success and the road to failure are almost exactly the same. Just let that sink in for a second. It completely shatters how society typically views achievement, doesn't it? I mean, think about it. From a really young age, we're conditioned to believe in this neat little binary system. We're taught that good choices and hard work, those put you on the bright, sunny road to victory. While bad choices and laziness, well, those put you on the dark, gloomy road to ruin. We naturally categorize them as two entirely separate entities heading in totally opposite directions. But this text, it forces us to confront a wildly different and honestly far more complex reality about how effort actually works.
The illusion we've been fed our whole lives is that success and failure are diametric opposites. Like, the assumption is that if you're walking east toward success, your back must logically be turned to the west toward failure. They're heading in entirely different directions. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the reality presented in our source challenges this completely. The roads are almost exactly the same. And the structural identicality of both outcomes means that the sweat, the late nights, the stress, the networking, the massive financial risk, they actually belong to both destinations. You don't magically get a different, easier road just because your intentions are good.
Which naturally leads us to a pretty massive question. Wait, how can success and failure be the same? No, seriously, how is that logically possible? Because, let's be real, at the finish line, they look incredibly different. When you fail, a business goes bankrupt, a campaign totally collapses, or your manuscript gets rejected. But when you succeed, you ring the bell at the stock exchange, or you finally hold your published novel right there in your hands. The outcomes are literally worlds apart. So to understand how the text reconciles these completely opposite outcomes with an identical process, we really need to deeply deconstruct the language of our source text. We've got to isolate its core mechanics.
Let's begin our semantic isolation by looking purely at the first half of the phrase, the road to success. Now, this is the universally recognized journey toward any achievement, but look at it from an actuarial standpoint. Setting out on this road requires placing massive bets with our time and our resources. We're talking extreme initiative, upfront capital, and a ton of mental energy. It means waking up at the crack of dawn, drafting meticulous plans, pitching ideas, and facing countless rejections. It is a continuous, relentless expenditure of risk capital. You don't just magically teleport to success. You have to lace up your boots and actively walk the road.
Let's move to and see how this builds as we add the next phrase, and the road to failure. Boom! This places failure on the exact same footing as success. And notice the highly specific language here. It doesn't say the slide into failure or the lazy pit of failure. It calls it a road. Statistically speaking, monumental failure requires the exact same level of capital risk and behavioral action as success. Think about it. You literally cannot fail spectacularly without taking high-probability risks. The person who never gets off the couch, they don't even get on a road in the first place. True, meaningful failure actually requires you to attempt something incredibly difficult in the exact same arena as the people who are succeeding.
Finally, we connect the two halves, are almost exactly the same. This means there aren't two neatly paved roads diverging in a yellow wood somewhere. There is only one shared process. From a purely empirical standpoint, the daily variables are literally identical. The entrepreneur who ultimately goes bankrupt makes the exact same energetic pitches, hires the same ambitious teams, and burns the exact same midnight oil as the entrepreneur whose company goes public. The daily lived experience of the person who will eventually fail is statistically indistinguishable from the daily lived experience of the person who will succeed. They are walking the very same pavement.
Synthesizing this text requires us to completely redefine what we even mean when we say the road. The road is an actuarial reality. It's a single, shared process of action and effort that leads toward both positive and negative eventual outcomes. It's essentially a neutral arena of probabilities, where your sustained effort is simply the ante required just to sit at the table and play. It guarantees absolutely nothing about your final destination.
The defining characteristic of the road is the friction, that forward movement, and the daily expenditure of effort. The outcome? Well, that's pending. But the process you're in right now is shared by both future winners and future losers alike. And this brilliantly illustrates the actual mechanics of this shared process, which follow a very clear chronology. First, you start the journey. Second, you put in the effort. Third, you face the unknown. And fourth, you arrive at an outcome. Does that sound like the path to becoming a world champion? Yes, absolutely it does. But does it also sound like the path to a devastating career setback? Yes, it does. Both individuals have to take that terrifying leap in step 1 and sweat their way through step 2. But it's really in step 3, facing the unknown, where probabilities become highly volatile. The fundamental anatomy of risk assessment and effort applies equally to succeeding and failing.
Let's expand this conceptually to represent, say, a 30-year career. Day 1, the shared effort begins. Month 6, sustained actions are being taken, systems are built. Now, from an actuarial standpoint, over a 30-year span of taking risks, the daily data points of a person who eventually fails and one who eventually succeeds, they overlap almost entirely for decades. You are walking side by side. The trajectory doesn't actually diverge until the very, very late stages of probability compounding. You could be 5-10 years into a major life project, giving it your absolute all, completely exhausted, and still be on that shared path where the outcome hasn't firmly split yet.
Which brings us to the immense semantic importance of the phrase, almost exactly. The text doesn't say the roads are exactly the same. It says, almost. In risk assessment, almost exactly represents a microscopic margin of variance. It is rarely, and I mean rarely, some grand sweeping gesture that separates success from failure. Over thousands of micro-decisions across an entire career, it's a 1% shift in risk management or marginal utility that compounds dramatically over time. It's tweaking a daily process by a mere fraction of a percent over a decade. That tiny, almost invisible statistical variance is what ultimately separates the two destinations.
We really have to shift our entire paradigm about goal setting and risk here. We need to stop wasting our emotional energy trying to find some magical, pain-free, safe road to success that somehow looks completely different from the road to failure, because it simply doesn't exist. Our source tells us there's a single shared path of action, identical foundational steps, and a microscopic point of divergence at the very end. So the crucial point is, the goal isn't to try to magically eliminate risk by picking a different road from the start. No, the goal is to accept the shared statistical variance of the path and focus entirely on managing those microscopic divergences.
This profoundly changes how we view every struggle, every setback, and every victory along the way. You aren't lost or failing just because it's hard. You're just on the road. The friction just means you're in the game. So I want to end this explainer with a final thought to leave you reflecting on your own journey. If the road to success and the road to failure really are the same, what microscopic margins of risk will you manage differently today? How will you navigate the shared probabilities of your own ambitions differently now that you know the absolute truth about the path? Think deeply about that. Keep focusing, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.